Hello, welcome back to JankTech. It's my series on Star Wars Unlimited where I talk mostly about twin suns, but also other alternate formats, cool combos, nothing sweaty, nothing meta. We're just hanging out, having fun, doing twin suns stuff. Okay, so I am really excited to do this video. As you may have gathered, it is a beginner level. I don't know how to make a twin suns deck at all. How do I do it? Ground up. This is going to be almost like, I want to say like I'm going to be lecturing. I actually have a bunch of notes. I wrote up like 6 pages of notes here. So I feel like I'm going to be like Professor Fee here, just kind of lecturing. So before I get started with that, I just wanted to ask y'all, please, if you like these videos, and I know people do because people have been talking to me about them, please consider liking and subscribing. Like my Notice Integrations Boba Fett is indicating. Also, if you want to talk more about Star Wars, please check out the swupdx Discord, where it is more people to talk about Star Wars with. We'll be talking about previews. We'll be talking about all those cool trips to Richmond or Las Vegas that people are doing. We're going to talk about previews for the new set once we start seeing more cards, all that fun stuff. Links in the description below if you're interested in that. Okay, on with the show. So we are going to be doing a Twin Suns deck guide. If you've never built a Twin Suns deck before, this is my suggestions for it. Please feel free to comment on stuff that I leave out, stuff that I say that you completely disagree with. I'm just going to do my best to give some good guidelines, some concrete numbers for you to latch onto, because I know with deck building at first it seems daunting, like how do I throw 80 cards into something? So we're going to talk a little bit about theory first and then get into some specifics later on. I'm just going to be talking. I am going to be bringing up stuff with swupdx, but being that I was just like, I don't want to have a whole ton of tabs to try to worry about, I will be doing this on the fly, so hopefully I don't miss anything. Cool. So without further ado, first we need to talk about building on a curve, which is something that, again, this picture is from Magic. I don't want anyone to get hung up on the exact numbers, but more just the general cost distribution, where you can see we've got an amount of things that costs 0, 1. We've got a lot of stuff that costs 2. We've got a little less that costs 3, and it sort of goes down from there. So this is about what your curve of costs is going to look like when you make a Twin Suns deck in Star Wars Unlimited. And like I said, we're not getting caught up on anything other than the sort of generalities. Like we want to say we're going to have a bunch of little weenie stuff that doesn't cost a whole lot, and then kind of slightly less of everything as the cost increases. So that being said, most Premier decks have around 35 units and 15 other things, which are mostly events. This translates to around 56 units and 24 other things if you want the exact proportions in a Twin Suns deck. I feel like that's a pretty good approximation of what you should have. Obviously, that varies a little bit depending on who your leaders are and what your deck's trying to do. But I think if you shoot for about 56 units and about 24 other things, you should be pretty much okay. Before Jump to Lightspeed came out, most decks, I think, went really heavy into ground because we just didn't have as many cool space units. But now there's enough good space units that you're probably going to have to make some choices as to what you put in there. So I have this up again. We will be building on a curve, meaning we'll have the potential to play either higher cost cards or multiple low-cost cards per action phase as our resources increase. I'm going to use the phrase playing ahead of curve probably multiple times. That means playing a card that is more expensive than you should be able to pay for with the amount of resources that you have. That's saying I'm going to use the Han leader from the first set, which, you know, is the one that lets you get another resource out. That's saying I'm going to use sneak attack or triple dark raid or any of these things that cheat out and play above the curve. So just keep in mind, if I use that phrase, that's what I'm talking about. Depending on what your deck is trying to do, you'll need to adjust the proportions of different cost cards in your deck. So Here's some extremely general guidelines. You'll want to shoot for around 16 to 20 units that you can play on turn 1, meaning around 20 units should have a 1 or 2 resource cost because you'll have 2 resources on your first turn. This is a quarter of your deck unless you're trying to be cute and run Data Vault. And honestly, if you are running Data Vault, you shouldn't be doing that if you're a beginner looking for beginning deck building tips, because this is like more of an advanced base. So the odds are good that you should have a couple first turn plays in either your initial draw or when you mulligan. Another 10 to 12 units should cost 3. These are the workhorses of the deck. They'll provide you with a solid foundation for your transition into mid and late game, so they should synergize with your leaders as much as possible. With your remaining units, include more 4s than 5s, and then more 5s than 6s, and so on. Try 6 to 8 4-cost units for starters, and then see how that goes. The rest of your deck, around 24 cards, is other stuff. In most cases, this means about 20 to 21 events and a few upgrades that work well with the deck. Events are another way to power your deck's engine and get you to your win condition. We'll get to that a little bit later. About half of them should be 2 or less, which is 10 cards, and another 3 to 5 are 3 resource events and a handful of higher cost, higher impact ones. I recommend limiting the amount of upgrades in your deck until you are more comfortable with why you are putting each and every card in. This is because upgrades can be a lot more situational. Obviously, you need to have a unit to put an upgrade on. So you need to think not only about what is this unit doing, but what does this unit do with this upgrade. Generally, you can play events regardless of whether you have a unit out or not. So what is your deck trying to do? Are you trying to win with a small amount of resources? I'm going to be referring to this as aggro. I think that there are some general deck archetype names that we can bring into Twin Suns, but they don't quite work. So I'm just going to kind of refer to these as aggro mid-range, which is a middle amount of resources that you want your deck to win at, or a lot of resources, which is either control or ramp, which just for the purposes of not having to say that all the time, I'm just going to call it a stall deck because your deck is trying to stall until you get later on. If anybody has better, more precise terminology, feel free to use it, but we're just going to say aggro, mid-range, and stall. So you ask yourself, what am I going to try to push winning early? Am I going to try to win sort of at the 6 or 7 resource range? Or do I want to try to stall the game out? Do I want to get rid of other people's stuff? Do I want to exhaust things and play ramp cards and make it so that I can actually win when I have more resources and my bigger chonkus leaders that do a whole lot of stuff deploy? And also think, how is my deck going to deal with threats from other people? How much politicking will I need to do? Okay, so selecting a leader combo. This combination of cards will affect everything else in your deck. This is why I've got the leaders up here right now, and will enable it to do the things it's trying to do. Generally, pick leaders that deploy earlier if you are trying to be aggressive, and later if you are trying to stall. Ask yourself, how does this leader enable my strategy? And I know this is like I've been speaking in some generalities, so let's get into some specifics about how these 3 different deck archetypes work with leaders. Okay, so this is maybe the best example of an aggro leader, Sabine. She deploys at 4 resources. She spreads damage around to everyone else before she deploys. With her action, deal 1 damage to each base, and only to 1 player when she is a unit. This means she benefits from ways to increase damage for cheap early on. So if we select a second leader, we want to pick someone who can increase early game damage. Leia is a great example of this. She allows you to attack with multiple rebel units in a single turn, and Sabine's a rebel herself. Kazuda is another solid pick. Where are you, Kazuda? You're all the way down at the bottom on the next page. Because Kazuda not only deploys early, but he lets you play bad units like Fireball, Contracted Hunter, or the Millennium Falcon from Spark, which have downsides but are undercosted to reflect that. So just try to think, if you're doing aggro, You want to focus on lots of cheap units so you can flood the board early before other people get completely set up. This means you want to put more cheap cards in your curve. You want to play multiple units per action phase in order to overwhelm with sheer numbers and push that damage, push the damage, push the damage. Your cost curve will be more skewed towards units that cost 1, 2, and 3, and it should have fewer things that cost more than that. Mid-range examples. Okay, we're trying to build a board state up to position ourselves to win around 6, 7-ish resources. Sentinels are extremely useful to keep more aggressive decks, like the Sabine or Leia or whatever, from getting too much damage in early, especially because we will want to be playing slightly more expensive and durable units that will stick around for multiple turns. Rose from Jump to Lightspeed is an excellent example of this. Since her ability heals vehicles, we can play vehicles like Silver Angel or Concord Dawn Interceptors and have them stick around longer while we graduate to more powerful units later. Rose pairs great with Obi-Wan from Twilight because he's also great at keeping units alive longer. She's also great with the Han Solo from Shadows because he lets you play a vehicle with a discount and she can heal the damage that he causes. In my experience, Twin Suns turns into a mid-range game most of the time, so decide on a strategy to turn the game in your favor, even if your deck is trying to win earlier or later. And then some examples of control and ramp or stall. So this is a tough one. I think this is a harder playstyle in Twin Suns because it's contingent on playing cards consistently to either get to more resources faster than everyone so you can bring out big units to stop the other players, or killing and exhausting everything else every turn until you can bring out big units to stop the other players. These playstyles work great in Premier since number 1, you only have one opponent, and number 2, you can consistently draw the cards that make your deck work since you can have up to 3 copies of things instead of just 1. Because neither of these applies in Twin Suns, you have to get creative. How can you delay everyone else enough to win at 7 or more resources? Iden is a great example of a stall leader because of her ability to heal consistently every turn. Where are you, Iden? Look at that. When an enemy unit is defeated, heal the damage from your base. Come on. In Twin Suns, you're going to be healing all the time when she is deployed. Especially when you pair her with Nala Se, who, when she is deployed, gives you even more healing. Another pairing in this category that works well is the Luke from Jump to Lightspeed. Where are you, Luke? This pilot Luke right here. And Mace Windu deck that I recently did a video on. Mace, 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 mace. There you are. This is the mace that just wants to ping everything. So the Luke and Mace combo is what spreads damage all around, weakens as many units as possible in preparation for Mace to deploy and completely wipe the board. Emperor Palpatine from Spark of Rebellion is probably the biggest example of this because this chonkus deploys at 8 resources. Oh my gosh. But if you pair him with somebody like, say, Newt Gunray, who just cranks out battle droid tokens for you to defeat to Emperor Palpatine, well, then he enables a strategy where you will get a steady stream of fodder for this ability, for this character, and you'll have a better chance at surviving until you can actually deploy him. And with that being said, with me talking about deploying leaders, using leader abilities, leaders must be impactful. If you are running leaders that you are not using every turn or nearly every turn, then your deck isn't going to be as consistent as a deck where the leader abilities have an impact every turn. These are 80 card decks with limited card draw and limited tutoring. And again, tutoring is a phrase from Magic that basically refers to being able to find something when you need it. I think the biggest example of a tutor card in this game is Search Your Feelings. It literally lets you search for a card and draw it. But anything else that does something similar, like Recruit here or whatever, you get my point. There aren't that many of these cards available. So part of your consistency comes from being able to use your leaders, since these are cards that you have out all the time that are always available for doing things. So you might be thinking, okay, well, maybe I want to pair Captain Rex and Padme because, well, Rex helps you get troopers, which help turn on Padme's coordinate ability. But a thing to remember is that Padme's ability not only requires coordinate, but you have to spend a resource to do it. And Rex's ability requires 2 resources. Can you afford to spend 1 or 2 extra resources every single turn while still playing cards to help you build up a board state? Another example of this is Tarkin and the Vader leader from Spark of Rebellion. So at first glance, these guys seem like they would work together pretty well. Tarkin lets you spend 1 and exhaust him to give an experience token to an Imperial unit. Vader, you spend 1, you exhaust him. If you played a villainy card this phase, deal a damage to a unit and deal a damage to a base. All the Imperials are, for the most part, villain units. So you would think, oh, I can play lots of Imperials. They let me use Tarkin, which in turn also lets me use Vader. But again, you will be playing behind curve. And behind curve is tough because that basically says I am going to spend my actions playing units that aren't as strong as the ones everyone else is using because I'm getting another effect from something else, like being able to do damage to something, like being able to put an experience on something. But being able to spend 2 resources per turn, unless you have consistent cost reduction, is not really a good use of your resources. For beginners, I would recommend at most using 1 leader with an ability with a resource cost while you're still getting used to building decks. It'll make your playing decisions a lot less complicated trying to allocate your resources for the phase. When selecting leaders, it's important not only to consider how do their abilities work together, but also how does my deck enable me to get to the point where I can deploy both of them. Most leaders aren't going to affect the game much unless they are deployed. Okay, all right. Everyone that plays Chancellor Palpatine can disagree with that statement, but everyone else, if you're thinking about playing with a 7 or 8 cost leader, ask yourself if you think you're going to get your money's worth out of them if the game ends before they deploy. So who's an example of this? Dooku, I think, from Twilight is an excellent example of a leader where you can get your money's worth out of him before he comes out. He does come out at 7 resources, but he consistently enables you to play expensive units ahead of curve if you have the units to exploit. This means if you think about including cards in your deck, you need to think about cards that maximize your ability to use Dooku's ability as much as possible until he can deploy. In the Dooku Entrenched Vulture Swarm video that I did a month or so ago, this was a major reason to include as many swarming vulture droids as possible to maximize Dooku's ability to use them as exploit fodder to get large exploitable separatists out in order to get to the part of the game when Dooku can deploy and have even more of an impact. Okay, let's go on to picking units. How do we want to pick units in this game? Units are the foundation of your deck. The units you play need to have synergy not only with your leaders, but also amongst themselves. This sounds hard when you're just starting out, but with some deck building practice, you'll start to see what works and what doesn't. One of the easiest ways to begin is to pick tribal leaders. I know it's another term from Magic the Gathering. I'm so sorry. This is leaders that care about particular card traits and then throw in a whole ton of stuff that matches that and adjust it to your curve. So let's clean up a little bit here. I got a lot of stuff open. So what are some examples of tribal leaders? Well, Padme, she likes Republic things. Cad Bane likes Underworld. Leia from the first set likes Rebels. Dooku likes Separatists. Grievous likes droids. Rose with vehicles, so on and so on. I know there's a bunch more. Y'all get my point. It's anything that gives you a benefit for playing something that has some sort of trait here. If you settle on a tribal leader, pick another leader that helps that leader affect their favored traits. So if you use Rose, for example, consider playing the Wedge leader. Where are you, Wedge? Consider playing the Wedge leader because he makes vehicles better. Rose likes vehicles, Wedge likes vehicles. Boom. Both of them do stuff to vehicles. Easy. Then you can fill your list with vehicles, adjust it to curve. You've got the start of a deck. If you are not playing a tribal deck, then another way to start figuring out your units is to make sure they benefit from your leader abilities in some other way. With Asajj jump to light speed, for example, let's get down to Asajj. With this Asajj here, or Grand Inquisitor from the first set, who likes to deal damage to your own guys and ready. Grit is extremely useful because you'll be constantly damaging your own stuff. With Boba Fett from Jump to Light Speed, I apologize, I'm jumping around from page to page here. With Boba Fett from Jump to Light Speed, anything that does non-combat damage is an auto include. Let's see, with Rey from Shadows, any unit that has 2 or less power is really good. So you can use her ability to put experience on something. So these suggest pairings with other leaders. So we can pair Krennic over here with Grand Inquisitor or with Asajj because he mitigates the downsides of the other leaders. It says, oh, we're putting damage on them with Asajj, we're putting damage on with Grand Inquisitor. Well, now they get an extra buff, which if you'd seen my Krennic Asajj video from recently, you'd already be a pro at this. Cad Bane is excellent with Boba Fett from Jump to Light Speed because you can play Underworld cards. They cause non-combat damage, which then makes Boba Fett do more damage. You can pair Sabine with Rey because, while she can get an XP, you have a guaranteed weenie 2 power leader that you can get on your 4th resource. So once you figure out your leader pairing, just asking yourself, how can I get my leaders to work as consistently as possible should give you a lot of ideas on units to include. A simple way to narrow this down is to use the form search on swupdx. So let's go. This is the home page of swupdx. You go to form search over here. So let's say we're thinking about running Rey and Sabine. We haven't decided on a base yet. So we will go down here. We're going to say we want aspects less than or equal to, we've got heroism, and we're just going to put all the rest of them over here. And then this basically says we're going to have every color except for villainy, but also including things in these aspects. We want units, and we want them to have a power of less than or equal to 2. So if I did all this right, we should be able to hit the search and we'll see, okay, we have 179 cards that are non-villainy that we can possibly play in this Rey and Sabine deck that will work with Rey's ability to put experience on things. So this is when you scroll through, and if you're on the fence about something, you're like, oh, well, maybe I pick a yellow base because I want to include a bunch of specters. Maybe Chopper will be good in there. Or the Rogue Operative has Raid 2, so putting an experience on that is super awesome. Or the Outer Rim Headhunter has got Raid 1, and I'll have a leader unit out early because I'll have Sabine out really early. So if I can get that and this out, I can start exhausting things. Or maybe you'll be like, oh, well, maybe I want to do green because I can put an experience on Maz before she even starts getting experience. Or I can put an experience on the Sundari Peacekeeper, and this thing's already got a big old butt. There we go. We got to butts. It was going to happen. So this is kind of the cool thing about this is then you can just kind of go through the list and think, okay, these are things that work with the leader combo. And you start getting excited about what you're putting together. And then you can say, all right, well, I know I want to go with green, so we can just click on that. We can take the yellow out, and then we've narrowed it down even more in terms of cards that we can include in this deck. And then you'll start to be like, oh, okay, well, I could put this in here, and I could put this in here, and this would be super cool with this thing. I like that these modern deck building websites are really good for this kind of thing. SwupDB is awesome for this, so I strongly suggest you use this. Okay, picking events. Events are the extra little bits that keep your deck ticking along, doing what it's supposed to do. You should include some sort of removal in pretty much any deck on general principle because you need to be able to keep other people's board state from getting too out of hand. Removal differs by color, but essentially has the ultimate goal of removing problem units from play. Blue, generally, removal events are cards like Takedown, Vanquish, Rivals Fall. This is all stuff that says just straight up defeat a unit with these certain conditions. So whether it's like remaining HP or a non-leader or vehicle, yada, yada, yada. Usually these are a little bit more expensive, but late game are super useful. Green removal events are usually deal damage equal to power. This is stuff like Strike True, where literally the thing that I just said, or Overwhelming Barrage, where again, deals damage equal to power. Red removal is just damage on stuff. So cards like Daring Raid, cards like Open Fire, it just boom, 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 damage, damage, damage. And then yellow removal is usually returning stuff to hand. So something like Waylay is one of our classic yellow removals. I mean, yeah, somebody can just bring it back out again, but it is a major hit to tempo, and so it's still good at getting rid of something. One of the cards that I like considering too is just, I just want this card to work. This is very much a JankTech card. I had no choice to work. I think in Twin Suns it has a place, but we'll kind of get to what your curve should be like in these in just a sec here. So I recommend putting at least 6 or 7 removal events in your deck. You can do less if you have units or leaders that have built-in removal. So if you're playing something like the Discerning Veteran that just comes out and captures something, or if you're playing something like, well, I guess either of the Dooku's that are able to either do damage or to defeat a unit, then you don't have to worry as much about removal because your units will kind of do that for you. Another interesting thing about removal is that, well, so I'm saying removal here, but also the cool thing about ambush units is that they're essentially removal. So if you were playing something like, let's get out of the form search here. What is it? Is it keyword? Let's see if it's keyword. It is not keyword. I cannot spell. But if you're playing something with ambush, let's say it's, gosh, I am blanking on the buddy's name here. I've played this a bajillion times in Upper Decks too. Okay, so if you're playing a Cloud Rider, for example, this is essentially a card that says, for 2, deal 3 damage to a ground unit. So keep this in mind when you're trying to think of including removal, because sometimes your units are literally just removal, being that they're likely not going to survive. So you can think of, Cloud Rider. You can think of, let's see, one of the new ships from Lightspeed. You are a green. You are up here. You have ambush. The Eager Escort Fighter. It's a 4/1 with ambush. Again, think of this as deal 4 damage to a space unit kind of thing. So when I'm talking about removal, these sort of do that double duty sort of thing in there. Once in a while, like, you can certainly play it where you don't ambush it into something, but I feel like most of the time that's kind of what it's used for. So the rest of the events that you play are going to be what I refer to as the cute ones. This is where you kind of get clever and specifically help your deck out doing whatever it's trying to do, which is, if you're doing aggro, you're trying to do more damage. If you're trying to do mid-range stuff, you're trying to stabilize the board and buff units. Or if you're stalling, you're healing, you're ramping, you're board wiping, all that kind of fun stuff. So maybe it's better to give like actual examples with this. So if we're doing aggro, for example, useful things are trench run, where you can attack with a fighter. So if you're playing with lots of little ships, then it gets a huge buff to its attack, potentially dies, but does a ton more damage. If we're talking about mid-range, I think one of the best examples of this is from Spark of Rebellion. If you're playing a deck with lots of force units, it is the Force is with me, which not only lets you attack with something, but it also makes it stronger. And then, of course, the various stall, ramp, whatever. So if we're stalling, yeah, like we're gonna want to play something like, well, honestly, we're gonna be wanting to have resupply in that deck. We're going to want to find ways of healing ourselves. So maybe we'll run the smuggle card that allows you to heal damage from your base. Maybe we will just try our best to wipe the board. So maybe we'll play a card like evacuate, which says everyone else has been building up their board. Well, I've just been concentrating on exhausting everyone. So I'm going to play this cool event later on in the game, get everything else gone, and then I can flip my 7 leader on the next turn. So this is kind of what I mean by cute. You're just sort of asking, how do these special events help my deck do what it does? And go from there. I want to just have a very brief note on politics and psychological warfare. So a huge part of Twin Suns is arguing over who is the biggest threat, convincing an opponent to form a temporary alliance, and distracting everyone else from the nefarious tricks you're trying to get away with. You can often compensate for your inexperience with deck building by negotiating well. If you've ended up with a starting hand that has no playable turn 1 cards, use that to your advantage. Point out how little of a threat you are compared to everyone else. Give your fellow players specific targets to consider instead. Say, I don't have anything going on over here. This person just played a sentinel over here. We have to take care of that. Someone has to do something about all these clone troopers over here. Oh my gosh, that's a 4/4 in space. These kinds of things. So you're essentially selling everyone else on how unassuming and ineffective you are at the moment, and convincing them that they should be hurting each other instead. If you can buy some time to set up while everyone fights amongst themselves, you can potentially come out ahead with good plays later. You'll develop your own taste for this part of the game, although personally I absolutely love it. It's something you don't really get to do in Premiere, and I think is one of the highlights of Twin Suns. So don't be afraid to do some negotiating if you run out of options otherwise. Okay, let's wrap it on up, y'all. So I think everything I've said thus far is painting with an extremely broad brush. Ultimately, the best way to construct a deck is just practice. One of the things that you can do is goldfish your decks. Goldfishing is playing them against each other by yourself, because there's not really a good way of testing Twin Suns decks out on the internet. Like with Premier decks, you can use Force Table if you want to get some dumb AI to play against, or you can use Carabast or whatever. But with Twin Suns, there's not really a whole lot else to do. I've actually goldfished up to 3 Twin Suns decks at the same time. It's actually kind of fun just to get a feel for what works and what doesn't, what the rhythm of the deck is like, where it might need a little bit more tuning. If you find yourself consistently resourcing the same card, get rid of it. You want the cards that you draw to spark joy, and for you to say, oh, this is going to be good for this situation. This is going to be good for this situation. And if you play a deck a few times and every single time you're just like, I'm not using this, well, find something that works better. You can utilize the card draw simulator on swupdx. So as an example here, let's just open up this one again. So you can use the draw card simulator right here to say, okay, well, this could be a possible opening hand, which thankfully, because I built on curve, I did have one usable starting one right here. And, oh, okay, so I'm like, okay, my next turn would be this. Ooh, oh man, now I'm just like, oh man, then we could stick the Celested Spacer on Anakin's Interceptor. And obviously I would have resourced probably unlimited power and maybe one of these because this is such a good card in this deck. So this is kind of useful just to go through with this on swupdx if you don't have the time or inclination to goldfish your decks and just say, okay, this is great. This is how this deck wants to work. This is what's coming out. You can always clear it out, try it again, continue. Oh man, this would be awesome. Oh my gosh. Oh man, now I'm like, oh, I want to play this. I would love to get this opening hand. Could you imagine getting the Gray Squadron Y-Wing out and the Masasi Tactical Officer, or just playing? I love this game. Can you tell? So yeah, most of all, just have fun. This is a casual social format of this amazing game. And I found that whether I'm playing this with complete newbies or seasoned CCG veterans, it's super rewarding. There's lots of deck lists online. Again, I've put out a bunch on swupdx. I will be putting out more 80 card beginner decks as my next series of videos. It might not necessarily be I'm adding 30 cards to my 50 card beginner decks, but I am still going to make them as budget beginner friendly stuff, going in line with all the principles that I just lectured you all about for the past however much time this was. 36 minutes. Oh my gosh. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts about basic little baby Padawan deck construction. Let me know what you all think. How do you like making your decks? What kinds of leaders do you want to combine? Do you think that some of my advice is completely out of touch and not worth it? I'd love to know your thoughts. And I think that's all I got. So yeah, look for some more videos coming out. I'm hoping to finally get some Twin Suns recorded. Scheduling conflicts, you know, this is just the nature of doing things with adults. And yeah, just look for all that other stuff. And until then, let's do this again sometime.